I'm 75 years old. And here's a number women in my generation almost never hear out loud. In the United States, women over 65 are nearly twice as likely as men to live in poverty in retirement. Twice. And we are the ones who outlive our husbands by an average of 6 years. 6 years that nobody prepared us for, because the men of our generation handled the money and we handled everything else. I'm telling you this because I almost became that statistic. I was 4 years into being a widow before I understood how close I came. I was married to my husband Walter for 54 years. We started in 1968, when I was 17, in a small church in Mansfield, Ohio. We both worked at Ohio National Insurance in Columbus for most of our adult lives. He passed 4 years ago, cardiac event. He was 71. I was 71 too. And for 3 months after he died, I believed he had left me with almost nothing. I believed it because Walter was a quiet man, and I had spent 54 years assuming his silence meant he was thinking about himself. I was wrong. There was a briefcase in the corner of his home office, a worn leather briefcase he carried for over 30 years. And what I found in it, on a Saturday morning in February, 3 months after he died, is the only reason I'm sitting here in my own apartment, paying my own bills at 75. So before I tell you what was in that briefcase, I want to ask you something. Not to subscribe, not to like, just to sit with me for the next half hour, woman to woman. Because if you are married, or if you were married, or if you ever plan to outlive someone, there's something in this story I wish somebody had told me at 50, at 60, at any age before 71. Let me start at the beginning. Walter and I got married in the spring of 1968 at the Methodist Church in Mansfield. We moved to a brick house on the east side of Columbus 8 years later, after Walter got the job at Ohio National. I started there in 1976 in the claims department, and I stayed for 40 years. 40 years. The same building, the same cubicle, the same vending machine that never had what I wanted. Walter and I both retired in 2016. We had it all planned. Cruise to Alaska in 2017. Blue Ridge Parkway in 2018. A whole month with our daughter in Seattle in 2019. You know how many of those trips we took? 1. The Alaska cruise. And even on that cruise, we sat at dinner most nights and didn't say much. That was our marriage. I'm not proud of saying it out loud, but it's the truth. We were partners. We were polite. We were comfortable. We were not, in the way the movies tell you marriages should be, romantic. There were whole years when I thought Walter had stopped seeing me. He worked. He came home. He read the paper at the kitchen table. He went to bed at 10. And then he died. It was a Tuesday morning in November of 2022. He was making coffee. I heard him cough once, and then I heard the mug hit the floor. By the time the paramedics arrived, he was gone. The doctor said he probably didn't feel anything. I don't know if that was the truth or a kindness. The funeral was at the Methodist Church. Our daughter Karen flew in from Seattle. The pastor said beautiful things, and then everybody went home, and I was alone in a house we'd shared for 46 years. For 3 months, I didn't go into his office. I closed the door. The briefcase sat in the corner where he'd put it the Friday before he died. I told myself I'd deal with it later. And here's the thing, I really thought there wasn't going to be much in there. Walter never talked about money with me. He paid the bills, he filed the taxes. When I asked, he'd say, "We're fine, honey." That was the whole conversation, our whole marriage. So I assumed our fine was modest. I assumed I'd have his Social Security survivor benefit, my own small pension, and the house. I assumed I'd have to sell within a year or two because I couldn't afford the property taxes on a fixed income. I'd started looking at one-bedroom apartments in Westerville. I'd started making the kind of mental list widows in their 70s make. What I could give up, what I could downsize, what I could quietly stop doing without anyone noticing. That was the illusion, a quiet marriage, a quiet death, and a quiet plan to shrink myself into whatever was left. But then, it was February, a Saturday morning, snow on the ground in Worthington. I made myself coffee in his mug, the one that had survived the fall. I walked down the hallway and I opened the door to his office. Let me tell you something about my generation of women. We were taught from the time we could understand language that money was a man's business. My mother balanced the household checkbook every Sunday night, and she still called my father at the office when a question came up about anything bigger than groceries. She taught second grade for 31 years and still gave him every paycheck on Friday. That was the water we swam in. Post-war America was built on a deal. The man handled the IRA, the 401k, the life insurance, the mortgage, the estate. The woman ran the home, and when the man died first, because statistically he was always going to die first, the woman was expected to find a male relative or advisor to take over. I mean, think about that. I had a salary at Ohio National for 40 years. I paid into Social Security every 2 weeks for 4 decades. And I still, at 71, with my husband freshly in the ground, assumed I didn't actually know what we had, because the knowing was his job. There's a study I read after all of this. About 60% of widows in this country experience a major financial drop within 2 years of their husband's death. Not because the money wasn't there, because they don't know where it is. The information was in his head, and his head is gone. And here's the part that makes me angry. Every retirement seminar Walter and I attended at Ohio National, the speakers always addressed Walter. They handed Walter the folder. They asked Walter the questions. I sat next to him and they would smile at me politely and not include me, because he was the planner and I was the spouse. And listen, I'm not saying Walter was wrong to handle it. He did what men of his generation did. The silence at the kitchen table about money wasn't malicious. It was cultural. It was the air we both breathed without questioning. But the cost of that air for women has been catastrophic. There's a reason the elderly woman alone in subsidized housing is one of the most common figures in American poverty. It's not because women didn't work. It's because the system was designed to route the financial knowledge through one person, and that person, statistically, dies first. That was the hidden system. And on that Saturday morning in February, sitting at Walter's desk with his coffee mug in my hand, I was about to find out whether the system had caught me too. I sat down at his desk. The chair still creaked the way it always creaked. There was a yellow legal pad on the blotter with a grocery list in his handwriting from the week before he died. Eggs, sourdough, bananas, half and half. I touched it and cried for about 20 minutes before I could do anything else. Then I reached down and picked up the briefcase. It was heavier than I expected. The leather was scratched from 30-some years of riding in the passenger seat of his Buick. The brass clasps still worked. I set it on the desk and opened it. The first thing on top was an envelope, white, business-sized. And on the front, in his handwriting, the same handwriting from the grocery list, was one word. My name. Just Margaret. I held that envelope for I don't know how long, 5 minutes, maybe 10. I was scared it was a goodbye letter, the kind that breaks you. And I was scared he hadn't written anything at all, that the envelope was empty, and I'd be alone with the silence one more time. I finally opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, dated the spring of 2021, about 18 months before he died. It started with 3 words, "If I go first." And then it laid out, in numbered points, exactly what he wanted me to do. The name of his broker, Frank Whitman in Dublin, Ohio, and his direct number. A safety deposit box at a Huntington Bank branch I didn't know we had. The location of the key taped behind his middle desk drawer. 3 retirement accounts I had no idea existed. An attorney in Columbus with a copy of our will. A consolidated online portal. Password written out by hand because he didn't trust password managers. And at the bottom, in pen, not typed, 1 paragraph. He wrote, "Margaret, I know I was never good at saying the things I should have said. I hope this is the saying of them. I always thought about your future. I just didn't know how to talk about it. I'm sorry it had to come to you this way. Take care of yourself. Take the trips. The accounts are for you. Walter." I sat at that desk for the rest of the morning. The coffee got cold. The snow kept falling, and I read that letter probably 40 times. Then I went deeper into the briefcase. There was a small spiral notebook, the kind he used to take to meetings. Inside, in his careful handwriting, was a financial plan for me, year by year, from 71 to 90. What to draw from which account, when to convert which IRA to a Roth, when to take the required minimum distributions, when to file for the survivor portion of his Social Security versus delaying my own. A reminder, underlined, that I should never give the broker discretionary authority, only advisory. He wrote, "You decide, he advises, always." And at the back of the notebook was a list, 12 items, trips he had wanted to take with me and never said out loud, the Blue Ridge Parkway, the Canadian Rockies, a train across Switzerland, a cottage on the Maine coast in autumn. He'd marked which ones I should do soon while I still had the energy. I drove to Huntington Bank that Monday. Inside the safety deposit box were the deeds, the life insurance policies, 2 bonds that had matured years before and were sitting there earning nothing, and a small velvet box with my mother's wedding ring that Walter had been holding for me since she died in 2011 and never given to me because, he wrote in a note inside, he was waiting for the right moment and never found it. I called Frank Whitman that afternoon. He had been waiting for my call. He told me Walter had been in his office 3 times in the last 2 years, building this plan. Walter never mentioned any of it to me. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for a long time that day. I was not crying. I was not relieved. I was something I didn't have a word for. The quiet man who read the newspaper at the kitchen table had been thinking about me, in detail, in numbers, in routes through the Canadian Rockies, for years, and I had never known. And he was never going to know that I knew. That was the reality check. The reality was not that he had abandoned me. The reality was that he had loved me in the language of his generation, the language of preparation and silence. And I had spent 54 years not hearing it. Today I'm 75. The briefcase is still in the corner of what used to be Walter's office. I sold the house in Worthington in 2023. Walter's notebook had a page on whether to keep it or sell it, and he had circled sell with a question mark. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near the Short North in Columbus, walking distance to the art museum and 3 restaurants I like. The plan he wrote covers me comfortably through 95. I don't have to ask anyone for anything. I took the Blue Ridge Parkway in the fall of 2023, the Maine coast last October. The Canadian Rockies is on the calendar for next September. I'm doing them in his order because that's the order he thought about them, and I want to think about him while I do them. My relationship with my daughter Karen is the thing I didn't see coming. For the first 60 years of her life, we had a careful, polite relationship, the kind where you call on holidays and don't say very much. But here's the thing about not needing to ask your adult daughter for money. It changes the texture of every conversation. I am not a burden. I am not a problem to be solved. I'm her mother. We have the conversations now that I always wanted and could never start because there was a money question sitting between us like a piece of furniture. I open the briefcase every Sunday morning. I have a small stack of index cards in it now. On each card, I write one short note to Walter, what I did that week, what trip I'm planning, what I learned. I don't believe he reads them. I write them because I owe him 54 years of conversations I didn't know how to have, and I'm catching up. Here's what I want to leave you with, woman to woman. If you are married, please, this weekend, sit your husband down at the kitchen table and ask him to write down what is in his head, where the accounts are, who the broker is, where the safety deposit box key is, what the password is, where the will lives. Don't ask him to feel romantic about it. Don't ask him to apologize for 50 years of silence. Just ask him to write it down. Because the love letter from a man of his generation is not going to look like a poem. It's going to look like a tight list in a leather briefcase that you find on a Saturday morning when you finally have the courage to open the door. And if you are already a widow, and I know some of you are listening from exactly where I was 4 years ago, please go open the briefcase. Whatever your briefcase is, the filing cabinet, the desk drawer, the folder in the hall closet. Go open it today. Don't wait 3 months like I did. There may be a version of your husband in there you never met, and there may be nothing. Either way, you need to know, because the next 20 years of your life depend on what is or isn't in that briefcase. I'm 75. I was supposed to be a statistic. I'm not. Not because I was lucky, although I was. Not because Walter was extraordinary, although he was. I'm not a statistic because 3 months too late, on a Saturday morning, I finally opened the door of a room I'd been afraid to enter. Marriages have silences in them, decades-long ones, and sometimes the most important things our husbands ever wanted to say to us live inside those silences, waiting for us to be brave enough to listen. Walter said everything he needed to say to me. He just said it in a typed list, in a notebook with 12 trips, in a key taped behind a drawer. And it took me 3 months and a leather briefcase to finally hear it. Don't wait as long as I did. Whatever the briefcase in your life is, go open it.